So I'll start by asking this, which is the sort of basic question. When you go out and talk to Hoosier voters, what do you tell them about why they need to care about the Secretary of State?
Well, the Secretary of State has a lot of important duties. The 4 divisions are important to my constituents. I think most people identify the Secretary of State's office as the chief election official, and of course I am, but auto dealers, business services, securities, so many other duties that we take care of.
I do want to focus a little bit on elections specifically, because
Okay.
there's been a lot of talk this particular cycle, going back to 2016, really about election security and what that means for the country and the state. So talk a little bit about what you've done so far to try to secure Indiana's elections.
Well, it's going to be hard to talk about it a little bit because I can tell you we've done a lot. But let me just start by saying in September of 2016, my life as an election official changed when I got a notice from the FBI that there were 2 IP addresses that we needed to check our statewide voter registration for. We did, and those IP addresses had not touched the statewide voter registration system. And then the next summer, I had the opportunity as the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State to testify before the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. And at that committee, Department of Homeland Security made a statement that said 21 states had been scanned. And the chairman of the committee asked me, said, Secretary Lawson, was Indiana one of those states? And I said, sir, I'm sorry, I can't answer you. I've not heard from DHS. So at that point in time, I decided the most important thing I could do for Indiana in our elections was to get my secret security clearance. I have done that. And so now I can have conversations with Department of Homeland Security and FBI and the other groups who are following national trends, and they follow these nefarious actors, and we can protect our systems before they get to us. So that was very important. But we've done so much more. You know, we know that the state is most vulnerable because of human error. That's what happened in Arizona. And so the FBI told us there's 2 very important things you can do to protect your system. Strengthen your passwords, which we have done. Anyone who has access to a statewide voter registration system has a longer password with numbers and symbols, and so we've strengthened those passwords. But we also are using 2-factor authentication. Every county in the state of Indiana is now using 2-factor to access statewide voter registration system. Most counties I should say, are also using the token. And so they have a USB token that they insert into their personal computer. In addition to using their username and password, that token says, yes, I'm physically present. I should be able to get into the statewide voter registration system. And we took it a step further. That token even is time sensitive. So if I'm a part-time employee and I'm only supposed to have access to the system from 8 till noon, that's the time period that the token allows me to have that access.
On that idea of election security, it seems like obviously the trend in elections in general going into 2016 for a long time had been to improve the technology around them, to make them easier, faster, that sort of thing. And yet at the same time, these now concerns about election security have made us sort of harken back for those days of paper ballots. And that's one thing that national experts say, paper ballots as a backup at the very minimum are really key. A lot of Indiana counties don't have them. We don't have the money at this point to transfer over, or at least that's what you've said. Is that good enough? I mean, shouldn't we ensure that paper ballots are being used in every county?
Well, I think it's important for voters to know, and believe me, voter confidence is of the utmost importance, but voters need to understand no voting machine used in Indiana is connected to the internet. Our tabulation machines are not connected to the internet, and every machine that is used does have a paper trail. They may not have the new recommendation, the new voter verifiable paper trail, but we're moving in that direction. And I think it's important also to remember that, you know, all of these recommendations came about later this, you know, our General Assembly left in March, session was finished. So the recommendations came about in summer, you know, early fall. And so we're moving, obviously we're moving that direction. I've met with most of our vendors. We're talking about how we can get to that voter verifiable paper trail, but I assure you that every machine has a paper trail.
Going forward then, if you were reelected as Secretary of State, what do you want for the future in terms of continuing to strengthen our security?
Well, we're going to continue to look at all of the new election recommendations. We're going to be talking about we'll be talking to our counties about what kind of machines they should be thinking about purchasing, and what can the General Assembly do to help them do that. There's a lot of things that we'll be doing, but one of the most important things that we're doing, as the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, I advocated for the completion of the Help America Vote Act funding. The Congress complied with that. They sent $380 million to the state and a little over $7.5 million to the state of Indiana. So what we're doing is working with the counties to ensure that our voting equipment has the physical security that it needs, that their storage facilities are secure, that they have video surveillance, that they have login information so that we know who's accessing those storage facilities. So we're doing a lot on the physical security side as well.
On the subject of elections, there's been a lot of talk in the last few years here in Indiana about election reform in terms of how we draw our districts, redistricting reform. And that's been a bipartisan effort. Folks like Speaker Brian Bosma have been backing redistricting reform for a long time, that idea of an independent commission largely drawing the maps. Do you think the Secretary of State, in her role, in their role as the overseer of elections, has a role to play in advocating for reform like that?
Well, it's the constitutional duty of the General Assembly currently to draw the maps, to redistrict. And so if they put a question on the ballot and voters say, yes, we think it should be changed, I'm absolutely happy to support that.
Do you personally think that that's where Indiana should go?
Well, as I mentioned, I've served in the Indiana Senate, I served on the redistricting committees before, and I know that we did a good job, and I know that our congressional districts were one man, one vote. As I recall, we had 9 congressional districts, and there was one person difference in those districts as we did the work that we were required to do by the Constitution.
Democrats largely have also called for things, but again, some of this is bipartisan, which is the idea of some other election reforms that include perhaps increasing the time at the ballot. Things like, we just saw a national report that said Indiana has the second worst wait times at the polls. Let me ask about that specifically. Is that something that Indiana needs to address?
Well, I have to tell you, Brandon, I was surprised to see that report. I didn't know MIT was in here doing that study. And so it's hard to respond to a study that you haven't seen. I only saw the newspaper reports. So I will say, obviously in 2016 we heard for an example, that early voting lines were long in Hamilton County, in other counties, but I know it's sporadic. And so since that story, I've had the opportunity to call county clerks on just a few of them, because the story just came out yesterday, and said, do you feel that you have an issue with wait times in your county? The answer is no. And so, but I will tell you that as a senator and as a Secretary of State, I've advocated for things that give voters access to voting, like vote centers, where a voter can go to any area, any vote center in the county on election day and cast their vote, which will help with lines. If one of those centers is busy, they can just go across the street or down the block to another center in order to vote. And so we've done all of those things. And in Indiana, we actually are able to vote early 28 days before the election. And we encourage early voting. In fact, we have done our voter outreach about early voting. Well, that'll be coming up very soon.
And then a couple of the reforms that I did want to ask you about. That vote centers is a great example of a reform that you've championed both in your time in the State Senate and as Secretary of State. In terms of things like expanded vote by mail, which some clerks have told me that they're really interested in, and the idea of same-day voter registration on Election Day, you can go and do that. Are you supportive of those sorts of things?
Well, I think the devil's in the details on those things, so I haven't seen them. I know those ideas did not get out of the Senate committee this past session, and so I'm happy to discuss those with them, and I talked with Senator Walker during that time and shared with him some of my concerns, but I know that they'll be working on those issues in the future.
I have one more question before I get to the last topic I wanted to talk to you about, which is there hasn't been a Democrat in the Secretary of State's office in a couple of decades now, and Indiana Republicans control every office in the State House, certainly. And so Democrats have made a point about there should be more balance. So I'll ask you, should there be more balance in the leadership of Indiana?
I can't think of any more balance than the issue that came up this past week. You know, the Democrat State Party made a blunder, and they sent out hundreds of thousands of absentee ballot applications to their voters. And when I learned the scope of the issue, I stepped up on behalf of Democrats and I said, these forms should be accepted. And so I can't think of anything that gives any more balance than that. I protect all voters, and our office works on a bipartisan basis.
Democratic candidate Jim Harper today talked about the large amount of money you've gotten in your time in office from auto dealers, both individually and from their trade organization. And he wasn't accusing you of anything, but he was saying it gives the appearance of impropriety when an industry that you directly oversee in your office is giving so much money to the candidate. Do you think there is an appearance of impropriety?
Well, Brandon, here's where I come from, and that is that, you know, we work with individuals and businesses on a daily basis. And if they think I'm doing a good job and they want to support me so that I can stay in office and continue to support them, you know, our auto dealers are important businesses here in this state. They're important to our economy, and we work with them on a daily basis so that they can protect their consumers, so that people can buy and sell cars, so people can get titles to their cars. And so I'm happy that they're willing to support me because I think they believe we're doing a good job.
That's it. Thanks so
Okay.
much for sitting down with me.
Okay.